He went off in a helicopter to do some field surgery. He jumped with his plasma, his bag, everything an Army doctor needs. Except his parachute.
MASH wasn't just a TV show. It was laughter in the middle of war, comedy hiding trauma, and a cast living two lives, on screen and off. What if I told you the real drama never made it into the script? The truth was whispered in contract battles, quiet feuds, and secrets only revealed years later. Tonight, we dig into what the cast went through and what fans never figured out. These stories will change how you see the show forever. But where did this hidden story really begin? The cast behind the laughter. The laughter we heard on MASH was real enough, but behind it, the cast carried stories that were never part of the script. Each actor walked onto set with their own burdens, ambitions, and secrets. Some managed to hide them well. Others leaked out in subtle ways fans never spotted. And that's what makes this story so compelling. Take Alan Alda. On screen, he was Hawkeye, witty, rebellious, and deeply human. Off-screen, he was far more than a leading man. Alda wrote episodes. He directed many of them. Eventually, his fingerprints were on almost every creative decision. That raises the question, how much of MASH was the work of a team, and how much was Alda steering the ship? Some admired his leadership. Others thought he took too much space. The tension between admiration and resentment followed him for years, and it shows in interviews where he admits how strong his influence became. But here's the thing. Not everyone enjoyed the shadow of Alda's rising control. Loretta Swit, who played Margaret Hot Lips Houlihan, fought her own quiet war. Her contract battles stretched across seasons. She wanted the freedom to take roles outside MASH, but the producers pulled her back. That clash shaped how she was written into the show. Sweet later revealed just how much she struggled with the limits placed on her, even as the character grew from a one-note caricature into a layered, complex woman. It wasn't just Margaret who evolved, it was Sweet forcing Hollywood to see her as more than a punchline. Then there was Gary Berghoff. Radar O'Reilly, the wide-eyed company clerk, seemed innocent and untouchable. But the man behind Radar lived with something he tried hard to keep from the cameras. Berghoff was born with a rare hand deformity. His left hand was smaller, his fingers slightly misshapen. Did you ever notice how Radar always hid his left hand? That wasn't an accident. Props, clipboards, and even carefully framed shots kept his secret away from viewers. For Berghoff, it was more than cosmetic. It was part of the frustration that followed him. He wanted recognition beyond Radar, but the role defined him so strongly that leaving it behind proved difficult. In later interviews, he admitted he clashed with a co-star he couldn't stand, proof that the set wasn't always the warm family audiences imagined. Mike Farrell, who replaced Wayne Rogers as B.J. Honeycutt, once described the adjustment of joining a cast already bonded through years of shared work. He admired the team, but also saw the cracks. Farrell noticed the mix of respect and rivalry, where friendships sometimes clashed with egos. His words reveal the dual life of MASH, a groundbreaking show that made America laugh, and a workplace where emotions could run raw. And that's what makes the cast of MASH so fascinating. They weren't just actors reading lines. They were real people carrying private battles while portraying characters who lived through war. Comedy masked those struggles, but if you look closely, you'll see the weight they carried in their eyes, even in the funniest scenes. The story of MASH isn't just the gags, the pranks, or the brilliant writing. It's also about Alda reshaping the show, Sweet demanding respect, Berghoff hiding his hand, and Farrell stepping into a family already divided. Together, they created a series that balanced on a knife edge between laughter and tension. But why did these tensions grow so strong? The answer lies in Alda's rising influence: power, control, and creative battles. Alan Alda became the heartbeat, compass, and, depending on who you ask, MASH storm. The question is simple. When one actor grows too powerful, does it lift a show or break it apart? At first, Alda was just another member of the ensemble. Hawkeye Pierce was witty, rebellious, and endlessly watchable, but the screen belonged to everyone. Yet, as the seasons rolled on, his influence grew louder. He didn't just deliver lines, he started shaping them. He directed episodes, pushed for themes, and demanded depth where the scripts leaned on jokes. For some fans, that was genius. For others, it was theft. But here's the thing. The shift didn't happen quietly. Behind the camera, Alda's authority stirred waves. Writers had to wrestle with his vision. Some wanted MASH to remain sharp, fast, and funny, the kind of sitcom comfort people came home to after a long day. Alda wanted more. He pushed the show into darker territory, weaving moral dilemmas and painful truths of war into every storyline. Suddenly, MASH wasn't just comedy, it was philosophy in a tent. Was Alda elevating the show or drowning its humor? Online debates still rage about this. A scroll through Reddit threads reveals the split. One fan says Alda's work gave MASH a soul, turning it from slapstick into art. Another fires back, claiming his ego warped the ensemble into a one-man show. The phrase that pops up again and again is domination. Hawkeye everywhere, others fading. And that wasn't just the audience talking. Cast members reportedly felt it too. Some resented being pushed to the sidelines while Alda took more of the spotlight. Imagine working on a project for years, only to see your storylines shrink while another actor calls the shots. Resentment was inevitable. One behind-the-scenes account describes heated disagreements between Alda and producers. He wanted realism, they wanted ratings. Sometimes the two collided in shouting matches, sometimes in tense silence. Yet Alda often won. His star power, his popularity, his sharp mind. Few dared to stand in his way. But that's what makes this story so complex. Even the people who clashed with Alda couldn't deny his brilliance. He had a gift for dialogue, for extracting meaning out of chaos. The war wasn't just the backdrop, he insisted. It was the point. Under his watch, episodes began tackling racism, sexism, and the scars soldiers carried home. Heavy themes that changed television forever. Still, not everyone wanted their comedy laced with despair. The tension shaped the culture of MASH itself. Some days, filming felt like a tug of war. Writers pulling one way, Alda pulling another, and the rest of the cast caught in the middle. On the surface, MASH looked effortless. Underneath, it was a battlefield. And it showed. Episodes swung between sharp satire and aching tragedy. One week, the doctors cracked jokes about bad food. The next, they grieved a soldier who never made it back. Some critics hailed the mix as revolutionary. Others accused it of being inconsistent. Either way, Alda was the architect. But what if I told you even success came at a cost? The stronger Alda's hand grew, the more some cast members felt like guests on their own show. Lore has it that tempers flared in dressing rooms. Friendships cooled. Certain actors kept quiet, but others made their frustrations clear. MASH had stopped being a true ensemble and turned into the Alan Alda show. Fans still argue about whether that shift was betrayal or brilliance. The truth is, both might be right. Without Alda's push, MASH might have been just another funny sitcom that faded with the 70s. With him, it became a cultural landmark. But the price was tension, resentment, and stories untold. And that's where the gossip lives. Did Alda save MASH, or did he steal it? Was he the hero who kept it alive, or the villain who bent it into his image? The irony is that Alda himself was deeply respected, even by those who clashed with him. He wasn't hated in the way Hollywood villains usually are. He was admired, feared, and sometimes frustrating all at once, which makes his story a riddle. How do you lead without overpowering, and how do you balance greatness with generosity? The cast lived inside that riddle for years. And while the cameras captured laughter and tears, the real battles were fought in meeting rooms, script rewrites, and the invisible lines drawn between ego and collaboration. But that was just power and politics. Beyond the arguments and the bruised egos, there was something heavier hanging over the set. A weight that no debate about screen time could erase. Because while Alda was fighting for creative control, the entire cast was quietly carrying something far darker: the real trauma of war. The real MASH versus the TV MASH. The humor of MASH was never just about jokes. It was born from real pain, stitched together by people who had lived through it. That's why the laughter hit so hard, because behind it was blood, fear, and the memories of men and women who had seen too much. The documentary The Real MASH makes that crystal clear. Veterans who served in Korea spoke of the chaos, the primitive medical tents, and the endless stream of wounded soldiers. When you watch Alan Alda crack a joke while holding a scalpel, you're not just seeing comedy, you're seeing a reflection of what those real doctors did to stay sane. They laughed because the alternative was despair. And that raises the question, was MASH actually one of the first shows on TV to deal with PTSD, even before the term was common? Writers knew they couldn't fake authenticity. Many of the storylines came straight from real experiences told by veterans. A supply shortage in one episode wasn't just a gag. It was a memory from a surgeon who had to reuse gloves and improvise with whiskey as disinfectant. When Hawkeye broke down over a patient he couldn't save, that was rooted in stories doctors confessed years later. But here's the thing. When you base comedy on trauma, you're walking a razor-thin line. Every laugh comes with a scar attached. The actors weren't immune. Playing these roles meant carrying heavy emotional weight week after week. Loretta Sweet once admitted that reading certain scripts made her cry before the cameras even rolled. Wayne Rogers said it was impossible to joke about war without feeling the shadows of the real thing. Imagine filming for 12 hours, pretending to sew up a soldier, and then going home to dinner like nothing happened. It wasn't easy. It stuck to them. Mike Farrell, who joined the show as B.J. Honeycutt, spoke years later about how the role changed him. In interviews, he explained that portraying a surgeon forced him to think differently about life and death. He couldn't just shrug off the reality behind the character. The experience made him an outspoken activist, especially against unnecessary wars. Farrell even admitted that playing B.J. left him haunted, because every scene reminded him that the laughter came at a cost. And that's what makes MASH so unique. It wasn't just entertainment. It was therapy, reflection, and protest wrapped in one package. Think about it. Audiences at home laughed at Hawkeye's wisecracks, but hidden beneath was a lesson about trauma, survival, and human resilience. When Radar cried over the death of a friend, millions watching at home cried too. That's because the pain wasn't fake. It came straight from the battlefield stories funneled into the script. That's why MASH resonated across generations. It was a comedy, yes, but it also forced viewers to look at the scars war leaves behind. The duality was sharp. On the surface, you had jokes about spam, camp pranks, and martini jokes. Underneath, there were raw depictions of amputations, shell shock, and sudden death. One moment you laughed, the next you were forced to sit in silence. That's not an accident. The writers built it that way because that's how real doctors described their days. A soldier would die in the morning, and by afternoon, someone was cracking a joke to break the tension. That emotional whiplash was survival. MASH captured it perfectly. But playing those emotions wasn't acting alone. It changed the cast on a deeper level. Alda himself once said he felt a personal responsibility to honor real surgeons through his performance. Farrell echoed that, insisting the show made him more reflective about compassion, humanity, and the absurdity of war. Even supporting actors felt the weight. What if I told you some of them admitted they still carried nightmares from certain storylines, even though it was only a set? And that's where the show blurred the lines. Was it fiction? Yes. But was it also a vessel for veterans' untold truths? Absolutely. It opened a space on American television that had rarely existed before, a comedy that forced people to confront mortality. That's why some critics today argue MASH wasn't just entertainment. It was one of the first shows to talk openly, even indirectly, about PTSD. Long before it had a name, the pain was there on screen. When you step back, the genius of MASH wasn't just in its jokes. It was in how it dared to balance comedy and tragedy without losing either. That delicate balance is why the show lasted more than a decade. It wasn't escapism. It was a confrontation. And it left the cast and the viewers permanently changed. So, the next time you rewatch an episode, look closer. Behind every laugh track is a shadow of a real operating room, a real doctor, a real soldier. That duality is why MASH endures, because its humor was never free. It was earned through pain. But while trauma was stitched into every frame of the series, that wasn't the only story hiding behind the curtain. Because when the cameras stopped rolling, another kind of war was brewing. Not in the operating tent, but between the stars themselves. Secrets, feuds, and what fans never knew. So here's the truth. Yes, secrets and feuds shaped the dynamic of MASH in ways the audience never saw. The humor on screen hid something else off screen. Rivalries, hurt feelings, and quiet resentments that never fully healed. Let's start with Gary Berghoff, the man behind Radar. To fans, he was the heart of the show, the wide-eyed clerk who made war feel human. But Berghoff himself revealed something startling years later. There was a co-star he simply couldn't stand. He never said it with malice, but the hint was clear. The Bond fans thought they saw between Radar and certain characters wasn't always there once the cameras stopped rolling. That raises the question, did you ever notice Radar pulling back in some scenes, almost stiff next to Hawkeye? Could that have been art imitating life? Then there's Alan Alda. For many, he was the face of MASH, the natural leader of the unit. But even leaders cast long shadows. Rumors followed Alda for years that he wasn't fond of every colleague. Not explosive fights, more of a chill that hung in the air. Some accounts suggest Alda clashed with castmates who wanted lighter comedy while he pushed for heavier, more dramatic stories. Think about the tonal shift in later seasons. Hawkeye's wisecracks gave way to deeper monologues. Was that Alda steering the ship while others rolled their eyes? And that brings us to the great divide. Comedy versus drama. It wasn't just about script direction. It became a quiet war of identity within the cast. Some wanted MASH to stay a half-hour comedy, keeping audiences laughing even through war. Others felt it had to grow to show the true weight of battle. Neither side was wrong. But it meant some actors were thrilled with the changes while others resented them. That tension doesn't just vanish when the cameras roll. It seeps in. It colors how a joke lands, how two characters exchange glances, how a scene feels slightly colder than it should. But here's the thing. Fans often misread those signals. They thought Radar's distance was just shyness, or Hawkeye's sharper tone was just character growth. What if it were more? What if those moments were cracks in the facade of a cast trying to balance comedy and drama while hiding personal divides? Take Berghoff again. Toward his final episodes, some viewers felt Radar seemed weary, even detached from the camaraderie. Was that because of the storyline, or was it Berghoff himself feeling isolated from co-stars? Only he could answer that, and he did, hinting at off-screen friction that drained his joy. Or Alda. In scenes where Hawkeye sparred verbally with others, some critics later argued it looked like more than acting. The bite in his delivery felt personal. Was that real frustration bleeding through? Could it be the echo of late-night debates about what the show should be? And then the larger group divide. You had actors who thrived on improvisation and light-hearted banter. Others wanted the show to deliver moral lessons with somber tones. When those two approaches collided, the tension was invisible to the audience, until you rewatch carefully. Suddenly, that cold glance, that awkward pause, feels different. You start to wonder how much of this was acting and how much was the residue of backstage feuds. Of course, none of this ruined MASH. In fact, it may have given it depth. Rivalries can fuel art. A distant co-star might push another to perform harder. The friction between comedy and drama gave MASH its unique texture, balancing laughter with tears. And that's what makes the story fascinating. The very things that divided the cast may have helped the show become legendary. But speculation lingers. Did Alda's strong hand as both actor and director alienate some? Did Berghoff's frustrations accelerate his exit? Fans still debate. That raises the question, when you rewatch, do you see friendship or do you see polite distance disguised as camaraderie? Next time you revisit an episode, pay attention. Notice when radar seems unusually quiet around Hawkeye. Watch when Hawkeye delivers a line with a sharpness that feels unscripted. These moments might not just be fiction. They could be the ghosts of real feuds, forever captured on film. And yet, despite all that, the cast left behind something bigger than their disputes. MASH wasn't just a comedy or a drama. It was both, fused together by people who didn't always agree, but still delivered greatness. That's the secret most fans never figured out. However, despite the whispers, the rivalries, and the secrets, the cast left us with something much bigger than a TV show in the end. Legacy and hidden meanings. MASH left behind something ratings could never measure: hidden meanings, quiet truths, and a legacy that kept growing long after the final credits rolled. One fan theory on Reddit suggests the entire show was actually told from the perspective of an older Hawkeye looking back on his time in Korea. That changes everything. Every joke, every breakdown, every surreal moment suddenly feels like a memory distorted by age, trauma, and regret. Was MASH not just about war, but about how the mind survives it? And here's where fiction bled into reality. The cast themselves carried pieces of the story into their own lives. Alan Alda became a voice for science, politics, and activism. Loretta Swit dedicated her platform to animal rights. Mike Farrell threw himself into humanitarian causes across the globe. The war ended on screen, but their fight for meaning continued in real life. Then came the finale. Goodbye, Farewell, and Amen drew over 100 million viewers. Not just because people loved the show, but because it felt like a cultural ritual. It was the country saying goodbye to something bigger than characters. It was saying goodbye to innocence, to war, to an era. That raises the question, what if MASH was never about the Korean War at all, but about every war, past, present, and future? MASH was never just comedy, but a sacrifice, memory, and truth hidden in plain sight. Feel free to share with us which revelation struck you most. Ciao.